Right, good morning everyone. It's a beautiful English summer's day, and today we're going to be doing a full service on this Phase 1 Dacia Duster. So I'm going to take you through all of the steps and we're going to learn as we go along. Apologies for the background noise if you can hear it. My neighbour is busy sawing up planks of wood, so that's fun. Anyway, this is a 2017 Dacia Duster, so it's got the facelifted front grille and it has the 1.2 TCE engine, which is basically a Renault engine. So this service will obviously be based on the 1.2 engine here, but if you have a different engine in your Duster, you should still be able to follow along with this because a lot of the bodywork stuff is the same, and you know, servicing an engine is pretty much the same technique for whatever size engine you have. Okay, so I've just taken the car for a drive to warm the engine up, and I've now supported it up on axle stands, just on the front chassis legs there. And there is quite a lot of access under here anyway because it's quite a high clearance vehicle, but this just helps to give a little bit more space to get under here. So the next step is we need to get this plastic under tray off, and that's just secured in place by some bolts on each side. Right, so here we have our sump guard, and as you can see we've got 4 bolt holes there, and then we also have this connector here which has a torque screw, and that torque screw just goes into a little hole here in the bottom of the bumper. I would actually suggest you remove this first because it's actually much easier to remove this while the bolts are still in place because it stops the whole guard from sagging down under the car. Okay, so the next step is we need to remove this sump plug so we can drain the oil out. So most Renault cars have the sump plug with this kind of square hole in it, and you'll need one of these, which is an 8mm square bit, and that just fits into the hole so that you can undo it. Before you drain the oil, it's usually a good idea just to crack this filler cap. That just allows air to get in. Right, so while the oil's draining, let's tackle the air filter and get that out and replaced. Actually, it doesn't look too bad. I don't actually have a service record of when this was last changed because unfortunately the Dacia dealers that did the service before this weren't particularly good at noting down the items that they've done. You know what, I'll just change it anyway because at least it's peace of mind, isn't it? So there's our new one, and it just slides into this little cavity here, and that just clips into place like that. Right, so the next job is to tackle the oil filter, which is inside this housing, and to get it off you need a 27mm socket, which is quite large. I actually had to go and purchase one especially for this job because I've never had to use a 27mm socket before. So let's see how that goes. Access is a little bit awkward because it's recessed in between the sump and the bottom of the gearbox here, but you can get to it with a bit of cajoling. Now remember, this is plastic, so you've got to be a little bit careful that you don't damage it. Okay, it's going. Now one thing to bear in mind is that as soon as you get this loosened, it's going to start leaking, so you want to make sure to position your catch can underneath so you don't end up making a mess, but you will probably get it on your hands. Nothing we can do about that really. I think it's basically impossible not to make a mess of this. Just let it drain a little bit. There it goes. It could have been worse, I think. Right, so let's just clean this off a little bit. So next we have to get the seal off. I've got to just prise that off. I don't want to damage the housing. So you just got to carefully lever that out. There we go. And then there should be a new seal in the filter kit. So you want to just wet that with a little bit of oil. Not too much, but just to lubricate it a little bit. And then we've got to get that onto this housing. There we go. Right, so the new filter just sits in like that. Just make sure it's in the center. And now we can refit this. Should probably do a bit of a clean in there as well. Make sure that's nice and clean in there. Right. And then this just refits into there. Okay, that's pretty tight. Righty, so here's our sump plug, and I've got a new washer to go on there. This is what is recommended by Renault. It's basically got a little rubber bit in the inside and then a brass bit on the outside, and then that just basically goes onto your sump plug. And it's quite a tight fit, but the idea is that it stops any moisture seeping through the threads. This is an aluminium sump, so you don't want to go too overboard with this. It's just got to be nice and firm so that it's not going to back out again. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, so now we can proceed with filling with new oil. So because the car is jacked up slightly at the moment, I'm not going to fill it right up to the full line. We'll top it up again when the car's back down off the axle stands. Okay, let's just see where we are on the dipstick. Tiny bit on the bottom. Okay, so I think we can proceed. Now obviously remember, it takes a little bit of time for the oil to make its way down to the bottom of the engine, so it will continue to increase. Yeah, so now we're about midway between low and high, so I don't want to put any more than that in at the moment. We'll leave it there for now, and then when the car's back down and level, we'll top it up again at that point. Right, so the car's back down off the axle stands now, so we can just recheck the oil. Okay, so that's pretty much on the low level now. So the main reason it's dropped a bit is because I've actually started the engine to reverse the car out of the garage, and that has circulated all the oil through the filter. So now we need to basically top it up again until it's just below the full line. Yeah, I'd say that's about right. Normally best practice is after a few days of driving, just check it again, and then you can top it up a bit if necessary. So the next job we're going to do is renewing the coolant. Now there's no drain plug on this radiator, so the only way to drain the coolant out is to remove this bottom hose here. And it's a bit of a mission because there's not a lot of space under here. The service manual recommends removing the bumper, but I don't know if I really want to go through all of that hassle, so I'm going to see what I can do and try and get this off without removing the bumper. So the first thing I'm going to do is, there's a little zip tie here. I'm going to just disconnect that, and I'll just give this coolant hose a little bit more movement. Right, so I have actually managed to get a pair of vice grips onto the spring clip here. You can see it wiggling about there. And that should allow us to remove this bottom hose and let the coolant all flow out into a collection bucket. It's going to go everywhere. God, what a mess. Lovely. Right, so the next step is to flush the whole system through with water. If you have a hose, this is the easiest way to do this, but unfortunately in my garage here I don't have a hose that's long enough to reach here. So I'm just going to do it with a good old-fashioned watering can. But I'm just going to do several runs of that and then just flush the system through and into this pot down the bottom here. So in the service manual they actually recommend using pressure to flush the system. They actually have a special tool at Renault for that, but obviously I don't have that here. So what I'm doing instead is just filling it up with water and then just blowing gently into this expansion tank, just to add a bit of positive pressure to flush the water through the system. Don't try this at home, obviously, but you know, if you're willing to do it and you make sure you're not to ingest it, it should be fine. So here's our old coolant, and you can see there's quite a lot of detritus and stuff in the bottom there. Some of that I think is just dirt that came off the subframe when it was washing into this bucket, but yeah, definitely worth doing. This is the first time this coolant has actually been changed, so it's a bit overdue actually. But it should last a good 5 years or so. So I'm really not a fan of these spring clips. They're not too bad when they're new, but when they get older and they start corroding, they can fail quite spectacularly, but also they tend to rust into place and they are very difficult to remove. So I'm going to replace it with this regular Jubilee clip instead, and that should just make this job a little bit easier to do the next time I do it. Okay, so I've put the Jubilee clip in and tightened it down. So the last thing to do is just to put another cable tie in here just to hold this bottom pipe, and then we can proceed with refilling. So different Renault engines have slightly different configurations, but the general procedure for refilling is essentially the same. You've got this header tank, which is actually the highest point on the whole engine, and then you also have either one or two bleed nipples, like you can see there. So what you have to do is open these, and then start refilling the coolant tank, and once the coolant starts pouring out of these bleed nipples, then you close them up, and then you fill up the tank. Then you start the engine, run it till it's up to temperature, and then you top up again, and that should be good. So now that we can see the liquid pouring out there constantly, that means that the level has reached that bleed nipple, and we can close that up. Right, that's back in place, and now we can proceed with filling up the rest of the coolant. Right, so I've poured in as much as I can now, and the level has actually stabilized, but I've only put in about a litre so far. So what we need to do next is run the engine and get it up to temperature so the thermostat opens, and that will allow the coolant to circulate through the engine fully, and then we'll keep topping this up and make sure that it remains at the full line as we do that. Right, the radiator fan has come on now, so we must be getting up to temperature. Right, so I've stopped the engine now, and after letting it sit for a bit, the level has dropped down, so I'm just going to top it up again. So you can see it's dropped down again now so we'll just top that up again. So the service manual basically suggests that you run the engine until it gets up to temperature, and then you let it cool again until the coolant is under 50 degrees Celsius, and then you top up the expansion bottle, and then at that point you close everything up, and then you run the car again just to check that everything works as expected. Right, so everything's cooled off again now, and I've just topped up the coolant to the max level. So we're now going to close everything up, and then we've got to run the engine back up to temperature again, and just make sure that everything looks good, and then we should be done with this job. Okay, so I've run the engine again until it got up to temperature and the cooling fan came on. As you can see, the level has dropped down a little bit again, so once this is cooled off again, I will top it back up to the max, and then I think that's the coolant done. Right, so this is the cabin filter. It comes with the plastic mounting, and that's the side that faces the outside, that's the side that faces the cabin. On a right-hand drive car like mine, you can find it up here in the driver's footwell, You can see the white one there, that's the one we're going to take out. Obviously on a left-hand drive car this would be the passenger, but it's on the same side regardless. So the way that it comes out is you basically pull out from the bottom, and then as you're pulling out from the bottom it should unclip from the top, and you pull down and there it comes out. So on a right-hand drive car, refitting is a little bit awkward because you've got these pedals in the way, but with a bit of cajoling it should go in okay. Let's try and clear out some of the leaves that are in the bottom here before we put anything more in. I'm going to go and get a toothbrush actually. Now I've got to try and get this back in. It's incredibly awkward because you've got, not only have you got the pedals, but you've also got the steering column. So let's just try our best to. Come on. There we go. I'll just put the ignition on and just try the fan. I want to make sure that we can't hear any leaves or anything. And that's that. So the spark plugs on this car are fairly easy to get to. We've got these coil packs over each one which need to be removed first. This is a little 8mm nut on each of these. The spark plugs themselves are these little thin iridium spark plugs, so they don't need changing very often. In fact, the ones in the car at the moment have been in there since new, and I'm not actually going to necessarily change them. I'm just going to take them out and have a look at how they look in comparison to the new ones. If they still look good, then I'm just actually going to leave them in place and I'll change them at a later date. But I have these spare ones to put in case they look like they need changing. So because they have this thin body, a regular spark plug tool isn't going to work. You need this, which is, this nut size is actually 14mm, but annoyingly spark plug tools have different measurements to regular spanners. So if you buy a 14mm spark plug tool, you're likely to get something that's too big, whereas this is actually an 8mm spark plug tool, but the diameter of the actual nut is 14mm. I don't know why that is, it's just some weird quirk related to spark plugs. So this actually fits nicely on there, and it's quite thin as well, so it's thin enough to get down into the wells because the wells are actually quite narrow as well. So to remove the coil packs, we first take this connector off. Just pops off like that, and then you can undo these. Okay, and then you can pull the coil pack out, and then we can get this spark plug tool down inside here. It's quite a long way down. Just click that into place, and then we can just carefully undo this. There we go. Right, so there's our spark plug. The actual spark plug tip itself, it's a bit difficult to see on here, but if we compare that to a new one, it's barely worn at all actually. The gap is almost identical. There is a little bit of oil fouling here, and I think that's because this engine has a recirculation feature for oil, so it does tend to drink a little bit of oil. So yeah, I think these actually look alright. The gap has worn a little bit, but I don't think it's enough to warrant changing these yet. I think these probably will have a good few years life left in them before they need changing. It was pretty tight, but I don't want to over tighten this because this is an aluminium head. So as long as we've got good contact, then I think we're good. Definitely don't want to strip this. Okay, I think we're good. And then refit the connector, and then let's just start the car and make sure that everything's working. Alright, all running nicely, so I think that's good. So one thing that's a little bit annoying about this car is it has a service light, which is, that in itself is not annoying. It's quite useful to know when your car needs a service. And what happens is once you go over the amount of miles prescribed before the next service, then this little light illuminates as well. And what that light actually means in the manual is that you need to take it to a Renault dealer and they'll have a look at it for you. But basically the only reason this light comes on is because you've exceeded the service interval. And annoyingly, in this car you can't just reset it yourself. Some models of Duster have a procedure where you can press the button and then turn the ignition on and off and it will reset. But in this particular Duster, and I think it was Dusters of a certain age, particularly in the UK, that had this setup where the only way to reset this light is by connecting to the diagnostic port and changing something there. So essentially it means that you can't reset the service light unless you take it to a Renault dealer. And of course the whole point of that is to try and get them to upsell their servicing plan to you, which is complete and utter nonsense. If your car is out of warranty, there is absolutely no reason why you can't service it yourself, especially if you are careful and you follow the procedures properly. So there is a workaround, and that is that you have to buy one of these things, which is a interface which plugs into the OBD port, which is in the glove box there. And you have to get a very specific type of one that has this specific chip in it, which I'll put on the screen. If you don't get the one with the specific chip in it, it doesn't work. And then what you have to do is, once you've got that, you then have to get a specific app. And this app is called Service Reset. And it's basically just a third-party app that's been made by someone in order to solve this problem with not being able to do your own service reset. I'll again put the links for this in the description in case it can help anybody. So basically the procedure is you first plug this into the OBD port, but then you should see the little red light come on, and that means that it's connected. And then what you do is you open the app. So the first step is to connect, and you can see that it's already detected the OBD device in the reader. So we can just say connect. And what that will do is we'll now connect with the reader, and we can now click this oil interval button. And that's now reading the information from the ECU. And we can see that we've got an initial distance of 16,000 kilometers and an initial duration of 365 days. So this is the interval that's programmed into the ECU. And I've set it this way because 16,000 kilometers is actually 10,000 miles. And I like to do a service once every 10,000 miles. The official manufacturer's specifications is every 12,000 miles. So I prefer to be a little bit under that. So basically I want to be alerted that it's time to do a service once we hit 10,000 miles. So the duration is set to 365 days, so 1 year. And again, I want to be informed after a year has passed because you are supposed to do a service once every year. So that's fine. And you can see here that the remaining distance and the remaining days have both reached naught because it's been more than 16,000 kilometers since we last did a service. And it's also been more than 365 days since we last did a service. So both of those have reached naught, and that's the reason why the service light had illuminated on the dashboard. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do reset. Okay, so annoyingly you have to watch an advert before anything goes on, but it is paying for the development costs of this app, so I think it's fair enough. Okay, we're done. Okay, so now you just heard that little beep. That meant that it's updated the details. And let's reconnect again, and then go to oil interval. Okay, we can see that that's now been reset. Wait, I've done this the wrong way around. I'm an idiot. So we need to do 160,000 kilometers and 365 days. So I'm gonna have to watch a video again. God, this is awful. And Temu of all things as well. Fucking hate Temu. It's okay. I think I'll... There we go. Okay, good. There we go. We've got it right now. So there we go. We can see the remaining distance is 16,000 kilometers and the remaining days is 365 days. And if we now start the car, we should see that the service light has now disappeared. Yep. So we don't get any service marker there. And the light has also disappeared on this side, so all good. Alright, so that's our service successfully done, and if this video has been helpful, please give it a thumbs up. It really does help the algorithm, and we'll see you again in the future. Cheerio.